Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder. Today we have a brand new limited series. It's going to be different from normal Analyst Talk with Jason Elder episodes. This is Sean Bair's guide to hiring law enforcement analysts. It's going to be a limited series where we talk about, from beginning to end, all aspects of the hiring process for law enforcement analysts. I understand that hiring can be difficult, seeking a job can be difficult. And there's special situations and difficulty, even in the law enforcement analyst profession, that are different from other professions. So we're going to break all of the issues down. We're going to go through Sean's guide step by step, and he's going to give advice, lessons learned, tips, his philosophy to help both managers and job seekers. We have 7 steps identified that help you through the process. We have the search, the application, the interview, the agreement, the arrival, the journey, and the exit. In each one of these, we are going to answer questions tailored to both the manager and the job seeker to help out both parties find better practices in the job hiring process for law enforcement analysis. Phew. This is going to be a lot of work, but it's also going to be a lot of fun. So first, I guess I should welcome Sean. Sean, thank you for joining me and thank you for agreeing to do this. How are we doing today?
I'm excellent. Thanks for having me.
All right. So we've been working on this for a while and trying to put this together. And I'm just putting myself in the shoes of the listener here with my first question to you is, why the hell should I listen to Sean Bair in terms of the employment process for hiring a law enforcement analyst?
You probably shouldn't, so you should probably tune out by now. So, and what I could offer might fit on a post-it notes. We'll see how long this goes. So obviously, for those who know me, I was an analyst back in the day, so I understand the position. I also helped to hire analysts, not only in my own department, but then I had an opportunity to travel all over the country and even out of country and help other departments hire analysts, help them craft their job descriptions, the testing process. Some departments test for the incoming analyst to be able to perform. I've sat on numerous oral boards, scores of oral boards, both for analysts as well as officers. I've ran a couple businesses, so I've hired quite a lot of people of varying backgrounds and for different positions. I've also got my MBA, which really doesn't mean much other than to know that in the MBA program, you take a lot of human resources courses and know the principles and sort of the processes of hiring. So that's what I bring to the table.
Hiring is difficult, and so is recognizing talent. I would argue that the success and failure of any group, whether that's a team at a government office or a private company, success or failure rests on the talent of its employees. Think about the hiring process in general and thinking, why is it so difficult? I'm a sports fan, so I think of the draft in some of these sports leagues where they're spending millions of dollars to hire investigators to test these new athletes out, go through physical, mental testing, and they still seem to find a way to get it wrong. There's still athletes that just don't work out. Yeah. And it's not just because of injury. It's something that, in the process that they can label them a bust, so to speak. Yeah. So if they're
a good example of that, isn't it?
Yes, they have millions of dollars that they're throwing at the problem and still seem to get it wrong.
Right.
But why do you think it is so difficult to hire?
Yeah, that's a great question. The people who hire analysts specifically aren't used to hiring analysts. Those people are typically hiring officers. And the way you just described how they go through the rigors of hiring, or I should say selecting ball players, is pretty robust. And the way that, and I would compare that to the rigors that they use to hire police officers. There's the physical aptitude test. There's the psychological test. They go through polygraph. They go through oral boards. They have to take a written test, a reading comprehension test. And that only is then to get hired. And then they take a physical test, which is actually, testing whether their heart's good, whether they can run, whether they can do different things like that. They hook up the electrodes to them. And then they've done all those tests to determine, yes, this person is hireable enough to send them now to the academy. Contrast that with how we hire an analyst. You maybe get somebody from HR because they have to be there for legal purposes. You get maybe a sergeant who might be a consumer of what this new analyst is going to provide the department, maybe another admin. And then they put out a request for applications. They review those applications based on maybe other department standards. And then they do an oral board. I don't find very many departments still today that test the incoming analyst. They just sort of take at face value and truth what the analyst tells them, and then they make a hiring decision on that. That analyst should have as much, the rigors to hire that analyst should be just as much as that officer, because they contribute as much, if not more, to the department. They're oftentimes paid more than an officer. Not as much liability, but there can be liability. I remember when I was an analyst in Tempe, some of the statistics that I was asked to produce, in fact, were part of some lawsuits against the department. So it can be a pretty important position in that department. I don't know why they don't take a more critical sort of approach and eye toward hiring analysts. I don't know.
As you were describing that just now, I thought how ironic it is that we often as analysts say that data is key and having the right data is paramount. And yet here it seems that in terms of hiring the analyst, the data that needs to be collected may or may not be collected. Right. And so it leaves yourself to chance a little bit because you're not getting the full picture before hiring.
No, you're not. And then as it applies to literally every other position that a person would be hired for, business and otherwise, you're going to be stuck with that person for a long time. So you best make that hiring decision properly. It's much harder to get rid of somebody than it is to hire somebody. So make the choice wisely. In the MBA program, like I say, part of the studies were human resources, and I did a big project on hiring specifically as part of the course. And I related it to picking out a puppy around Christmas time. Sort of what I talked about to the class was that oftentimes we get sort of this frenzy and excitement about hiring, or in this case, picking out a puppy. So what we do is maybe we find ourselves in the mall and we wander into the pet store and we see some cute puppies and, oh, look at this one. And that's the cutest of the bunch. And, oh, look, he's smiling at me. And then we end up making sort of a snap decision to pick that puppy. And then we take it home and present it to the kids at Christmas time or whatever. But the process to pick out that puppy is very similar to the process that we pick out a new employee. And we don't want to have that sort of fervor and excitement about it. And we need to take the proper steps, because just like a puppy, if I had made a rash decision to pick that dog, when I get home, I might not have realized this dog isn't actually the type of dog that would be best for my family. This one is going to grow to be large. We live in an apartment. This one needs to have a lot of exercise. Well, we're older, so we can't exercise as much. This one's going to be requiring X, Y, and Z, or has hip issues, or whatever these things are. You need to do your research and you need to understand what it is you're getting into, because like an employee, you're going to have that dog for 12 to 15 years. You're going to have that employee for a long time too. It could be upwards of 20 plus years. And you want to make sure you pick the right one right from the get-go. So it does take a lot of research and understanding and knowing what type of analyst that department needs, what's going to be right for them, what type of analyst that might be right for one department might be completely wrong for another department. So you really need to do your due diligence, the hiring managers, to understand what it is I'm wanting, what it is that's going to best serve our department and its citizens that it serves. and then go through a rigorous process. Unlike just sort of frantically picking out a dog last minute, you don't frantically pick out an employee. If you don't get in your first batch the right applicant, then keep looking. Don't just decide that, okay, well, this is the best of the bunch. Make sure you test them. Make sure that you're putting them through the rigors before you hire them so that you can authenticate what they're telling you. Yes, I'm an expert in ArcGIS. Yes, I'm an expert in Excel. Yes, I know Microsoft products, this, that, and the other. Well, have you tested them? Do they know the statistical processes that you're hoping that they're going to be able to apply to your department? Test them on that. Don't just take it at their word that they know how to do those. You need to test them on it. So I would just compare it, like I said, if people want to think about, how I pick out a dog. And for those who have done that and done like I've done, where you've sort of on a whim selected an animal, you might have found yourself in a little bit of a pickle down the road. You don't want to do that with an employee. You want to make sure that it's a great fit for both of you, that you're picking the right fit for your department, and that employee is going to be happy, that department's going to be happy, and they're going to be able to be as productive as they can be. And they'll be around for a long time, and it'll be a productive relationship.
For the job seeker, then, some of them are awkward and self-conscious and have difficulty selling themselves and identifying their skills. In your puppy example, they might have difficulty coming off as a quote unquote attractive selection, so to speak. So why do you think folks seeking law enforcement analyst positions have such a difficult time with the hiring process?
I don't know that they do any more so than anybody else. I've hired a lot of sort of different types of people and positions, from analysts to software developers, from salespeople to you name it. And people are people. So, the crime analyst types do tend to be a little bit more analytical, naturally. And so they're very similar to developers. Developers are very analytical too. Sometimes the analytical types might not get a sense of the feely, touchy, fluffy, types of characteristics they need to portray, or that department or that hiring person might be looking for. So they need to make themselves aware of that. I don't think people practice enough. I mean, I could really go on for a long time about the hiring process and preparing yourself for the hiring process. But I think that what folks can do is practice. Practice makes perfect. No different than when I hired for my first crime analyst job back in 1992. I practiced with people who knew how to do chi-square because I wasn't as confident in doing chi-square as should have been. As part of the test that we had to do to be hired as an analyst there, you had to do chi-square by hand. And so I had spent days prior doing various chi-square tests just so I can make sure that I did that portion of the test well. I did mock interviews, so I was prepared to have 3 people staring at me while I was trying to explain myself. One of the techniques that I like to use when I am being hired or when I'm being interviewed, particularly for a job like this, for an analyst, is to bring in a portfolio. So I can sit there and talk all day about how great a map maker I am, or how great a statistician I am, or how great at Excel I am. But it's even better to be able to hand them something to look at when I'm talking about those products so that they can see how good I am. And one of the beauties of that is, as sort of a tactic or a technique that the nervous interviewee might be able to use, is when you hand somebody something, they look at it. So it gives you that brief sort of pause or moment where you can gather yourself, you can sort of take a little bit of a deep breath, and you can focus on the description of what they're looking at versus this eye stare between you, and that you're looking at somebody maybe who's a lieutenant or a captain or even a chief in uniform that might be a little intimidating. All 3 of them or 4 of them or 5 of them staring at you at the same time can get a little overwhelming. That is a nice little technique that I like to do, is to hand them something to look at as I'm describing what my capabilities are. It's preparation, Jason, is what comes down to really anything, whether a developer is going in to hire, or a sales manager is, or a crime analyst is looking to be hired. They need to prepare for that interview to knock it out of the park. Practice makes perfect.
That's a nice little introduction, and we'll get into all those
Yeah.
comparisons and different examples that you were talking about. So for the listener, this just gives you a little sample of what this limited series is all about. We are going to go through all the different aspects of hiring and being an employee and an employer. So as I mentioned before, we're going to have sections with manager-specific questions that Sean's going to answer from the manager's perspective. We're going to have questions that Sean's going to answer from the job seeker perspective. Sean's going to share his philosophy, tips, lessons learned, advice, and stories along the way. The goal of this is for managers to improve their hiring practices. And for the job seeker, it's finding ways to come up with a better plan and technique for landing that next law enforcement analyst position. The first step in Sean Bair's guide to hiring a law enforcement analyst is the search. This is both from the perspective of the manager and from the job seeker. For the manager, this is maybe a need to create a brand new position in your organization. It may be the decision to replace an employee that's no longer there. For the job seeker, this section is going to help you decide whether it's time to move on to a new position and come up with that plan of getting that next position. And for those that are just starting out as a job seeker, this section will go into items to think about as you're putting together your plan to land that first law enforcement analyst job. So, Sean, I guess the first question I want to ask you is, from the manager's perspective, it's time to create a new position. When does a manager know it's time to create a new position?
That's a good question. It's almost before it's needed, really. Either they're going through accreditation or they find themselves wanting to know things of the RMS and the CAD system that nobody around the department seems to know how to get the answer to. I don't believe there's really a magic officer count or number, though. In other words, like you need an analyst when you have 300 officers, or you need an analyst when you have 10,000 calls for service a year, or this many citizens. I don't really buy into that. I mean, it's sort of applicable from an officer perspective, but not so much from an analyst perspective. So it really depends on what the policing paradigm the department is in at that moment, and if they're struggling to find answers because the department doesn't have the person or the technology to get that answer. When they start finding themselves in that position, wouldn't it be great to know this? Shouldn't we be able to do that? Blah, 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 blah. That's when you start realizing, you know what? The person who does this is the analyst. That's when they can appreciate and realize that it's time to start looking to hire an analyst.
So what are the key factors to identifying the purpose, goal, and tasks of this new position?
So you have to determine, like, what are the goals of the department and how do we think the analyst can help us achieve them? Are our needs strategic in nature? Are we trying to do administrative analysis? Are we wanting tactical work done, finding crime trends and patterns? Are we needing maybe more of an intelligence analyst work? Again, getting back to that, what is the paradigm of the department right now? What do we find ourselves in? Back in my day, we found ourselves in the paradigm of community policing and problem-oriented policing. So there was a lot of need for strategic crime analysis. So people to do long-term trends and patterns, research projects, surveys, those sorts of analytical products were necessary. So it depends on, again, what those factors are the department is trying to accomplish. You might find the best analysts in the world who can just knock it out of the park with tactical crime analysis, maybe do some intelligence work for you too, but maybe they don't have the experience as much as another might on resource allocation, beat reconfiguration, those more administrative type functions that the department is needed. So the department needs to know what its paradigm it's in is.
Just as you were mentioning that, it just reminds me that in law enforcement, it can be very much a copycat profession, in that you hear somebody, you had mentioned community policing or problem-oriented policing or intelligence-led policing. I mean, these are ideas that seem to just catch fire in the industry. And then all of a sudden, police chief or executives are like, oh, well, we need somebody to do intelligence-led policing. And
Yeah.
and you're kind of telling the manager, go hire that. And from the manager's perspective, you could really be caught flat-footed, just not being up to speed with that kind of trend, then being forced to come up with a position and identifying the purpose, goal, and task for that new position.
Absolutely.
Okay, you got a new position, got to identify specifically what the purpose, goal, and task for the new position. What are some things that might be overlooked at this stage?
I think being too short-sighted with your focus, like I said, if the department realizes that, we need an analyst right now, we need to figure out how to allocate our resources, and we need to reconfigure these beats because they're not conducive to a equitable distribution of resources. And so we need to hire an administrative crime analysis or somebody who can really focus on that. But then not realizing that they also have or are going to have, because maybe there's some big new mall moving into their jurisdiction. Maybe that department is going to host a major event over the next couple of years. And so maybe they need somebody who's going to be proficient in operational crime analysis. Maybe they realize that their investigative units are starting to mention that, it'd be really nice if you can have people cull through all this data trying to find trends and patterns. So I think being too short-sighted with this is our immediate need and let's go hire somebody for that need, and not realizing that let's hire somebody who can help us achieve those 5-year goals that we have, 10-year goals we have as well. I would also say that ensuring that they can accomplish CALIA if your department wants accreditation. So if you're hiring somebody and it's a brand new analyst, you've never had an analyst before, and if you're not already an accredited law enforcement agency, chances are you're probably going to want to go through that and get that accreditation. And so you should, again, not being too short-sighted, know that what those requirements are for your department to be able to conduct crime analysis under those two standards. So the accreditation process has the CALIA standards, obviously, as most of your listeners know. And what are those things that need to be done to accomplish that accreditation? So you wouldn't want to hire somebody that is so focused, let's say, on intelligence analysis, and then as part of the CALIA process, you realize, we've got to be able to do, resource allocation. And now that analyst, you're trying to put sort of a square peg in a round hole there. Not to say that they can't do that, because many analysts wear all the hats. But just be aware. It's more of an awareness of what you have coming down the pike, and that you're going to be ready to address those needs when they happen. The other thing I would say is, in terms of what may be overlooked, is not being afraid to seek outside help with the hiring process. If you don't have an analyst or you don't have an analyst manager, how are you going to hire an analyst? So you can read up on it. You can, again, look at some standards that are out there. But there are a bunch of analysts that would be probably more than happy to come to your agency and help you hire the right applicant, the right candidate. I might suggest that they look local first, because usually the surrounding agencies and their analysts would know sort of the lay of the land and what is needed for their jurisdictions. But I will also say that when I worked for CMAP and others, I was brought in across the country to help a department craft the necessary questions and tests, and also even sit on the oral board to help them vet the right candidate. And sometimes they were probably grateful that I was there, because they might have made the wrong choice for the department. Not that that analyst wasn't good, but again, it's all about a good fit, a right fit. So look to your brothers and your sisters to help you hire somebody. They're going to want that, because they're going to be collaborating with them for cross-jurisdictional purposes anyway. So they're going to want you to hire the right person.
Oh, I really like that idea. Reaching out to a neighboring jurisdiction, asking their analysts to help to identify the new analyst. With all the points that you just said, that's a really good tip, and I think often overlooked. So for managers hiring existing positions, I think the first question to be asked, though, is to fill or not to fill. You have situations where, okay, you have an employee has exited, but it might not be just a no-brainer to then look to fill the position. So what goes into the idea to fill or not to fill a position?
Yeah, well, from the department's perspective, it's almost always the first decision is relative to budget. So, if the money's there, it's already been allocated, and you don't intend to use it for something else, and even then using monies that have been allocated for a particular position towards something else aren't that easy to do. So why wouldn't you fill it? That would be my question back to you is, yeah, if you're looking to, because of, for whatever reason, the department's budget is reducing and maybe you haven't had your biggest bang for your buck from the analytical shop or that analytical person, maybe wait a year or two to refill that. But my druthers would be, because, obviously my passion is in crime analysis, I would say, yes, you absolutely have to hire that, because it's a force multiplier for that department. So you need that analyst and you need to fill that. But yeah, the budget's usually the prime deciding factor there.
Also along those lines, how do you identify what worked and didn't work about the position?
Yeah, I like that question. It's too bad that we separate government and business as much as we do. And I'll say that, obviously I've spent a number of years in government. I've spent a number of years in business, and government should borrow more business practices because I think they'll help them. So, how do we decide what worked and what didn't? Well, what we do in business is we would take a business approach to that. So I would suggest when you first hired that analyst or any position, you've developed KPIs, key performance indicators. What is the measure of success for this position? And then when that position comes to its conclusion, either they exit or they get fired or whatever happens, you're constantly reevaluating these key performance indicators to see how well is that position performing? How well did that person do? That's what we do in business. It's often based off of an ROI, return on investment. I spent X number of dollars toward a marketing manager in hopes that they would increase our revenue by this delta. Did they do that? Did they meet their mark? And did they improve our bottom line? It's very sort of basic stuff. You just look back to the data. Every analyst should appreciate this. And that's what helps us to determine how well we're doing in these positions are these sort of performance indicators. Another would be a business strategy that you might apply. It's also a law enforcement technique, is a survey the customers. So in business, we're constantly surveying our customers because our whole purpose for doing business is to satisfy our customers. We want to make them happy. If they're not happy, they don't use us and they go to another company. The same holds true with law enforcement. The analyst has customers too, and those customers are oftentimes, depending upon what type of analytical area you've got them in. They could be doing administrative crime analysis. They could be doing strategic, investigative, tactical. And so with all these various departments or customers that are being serviced, how well did that analyst service his or her customers? So you need to be able to get that sort of feedback. And then you might, as a result of that, pivot a little bit and decide, you know what, it seems like patrol really doesn't need crime analysis right now, or our analyst, or they didn't do a lot for them and didn't give very favorable reviews, but yet the administration within our department loved crime analysis. They loved the beat reconfiguration study. They loved the resource allocation study, all that kind of stuff. The resource acquisition as well, how many officers we needed. So the survey is an excellent tool that we can use both in business and in government to determine how well that individual, that position has serviced its customers.
And I guess for the job seeker now, when you hear that it's a new position, what should that tell the job seeker?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, in the interview, you would be ready to describe how you can hit the ground running, because obviously the position's new, so they haven't had anybody in that position before. It's a brand new position. So they don't have necessarily any sort of expectations or understanding of what they're going to get. They have an idea, but it's new to them too. So you need to be ready. The job seeker needs to be ready in that interview to describe how he or she can hit that ground running, because the department isn't going to be able to hold their hand or say, okay, now you're going to do this and now you're going to do that. They are going to expect that analyst to be extremely autonomous and just know how to do the job. So, knowing and following industry standards to bring crime analysis to their agency, they'll need to articulate that in the interview, how they can do that. The department's going to want to know that you can know how to do the job already, that nobody's going to be there for you to set the routine. There'll be general guidelines probably in place, probably from CALIA standards that they have researched or came up with. But how you conduct the work will be entirely up to you as you get that new job. Because again, there's no processes or procedures in place. So having said all this, you have to assure them in the interview that you are a person who can let them relax and rest easy, knowing that you've got this. So in that interview process, knowing that it's a new position, confidence and you describing your acumen is going to be very important things to do or portray in the interview, given that it's going to be a new position.
So if it's a new position, and that's the first crime analyst position or law enforcement analyst position that the agency or department has hired, understand that it's brand new for them. And I think what you mentioned about how do you work autonomously is very important, because they're going to be learning as they go. And so they're not going to be able to rely as much on experience as if they're a crime analyst manager that's been doing the job, that has gone through several hires. Might be able to lean on them a little bit more in that situation. But if it's a brand new position, crime analysis is just brand new, or intelligence analysis is brand new, it could be difficult. And I think the nice thing about it is you can carve your own position a little bit, because I think you're going to have a little bit more say in what you should be doing and wanting to learn, because everybody's going to be learning as they go. But at the same time, there's not going to be that guidance there that you may want.
It's a lot personality driven, isn't it, Jason? Because as a former crime analyst, I can tell you I would want to go to a department that I was their first crime analyst, because I do like to work autonomous. So again, marrying it to the personality, I do like to work autonomous. I don't like policies and procedures already in place that I have to adhere to. And heaven forbid I ask, well, why are we doing it this way? And it's because we've always done it this way. Junior. I don't like that. So I like to be able to invent and come up with my own way of doing things to best serve my customers, the department and as a whole. Conversely, if I'm somebody, it's like, you know what, maybe I'm a little bit newer as an analyst and I don't have my own sort of set procedures and techniques and a real firm grasp on maybe different software and stuff. I may want to, be wary of jobs like that where I would be the first analyst. And maybe I take a position where I start looking instead for established agencies or established crime analysis units. And, as a nod to maybe some future questions you're going to ask, that's where the internship really can help a budding analyst out, because they can see where they're at sort of initially. Am I this type that I do want to work in a department where they don't have really much established? I find that exciting to be able to set up that unit. Being an intern can kind of give you a sense of that. Or do I find myself when doing that internship that, I kind of like where everything's already done for me or set up for me. And I come in there and I do it to the best of my abilities and I rock each of these procedures that are in place. But I really don't want to create these things. That's not my bag. So I think the internships can help somebody understand that, how they would do in those positions.
Yeah, nice teaser on the intern segment.
Yeah, I
Good
try.
job. I guess another thing I'm thinking about too is we're talking about this from the job seeker's perspective, new position, and then comes the idea of civilian versus sworn, because that's something that I think we have to address too. When I was at Cincinnati Police Department, I was the very first civilian crime analyst. They had sworn officers as crime analysts, but I was the first one as a civilian. And so, but by that point, I had experience as an analyst. I had my philosophy. I was a little bit more established, like what you were describing. So it wasn't maybe as daunting coming into that situation, because I had worked with police departments. I had worked with sworn officers in other jobs and previous employment. So it wasn't as daunting of task. But I don't know, do you have something to add in terms of the dynamic between sworn versus civilian in this topic?
Yeah, we almost should have prefaced our entire discussion on hiring with getting that out of the way. Now, this is my opinion, but having been a crime analyst and having been a sworn police officer, I think I can give my 2 cents here with confidence. I absolutely think a crime analyst should be a crime analyst and police officers should be police officers. Don't take a police officer that was hired as a police officer, that was trained as a police officer, that has that skill set, and now make them a crime analyst. Now, having said that, if there was a police officer that had made retired or decided that position's no longer sort of for him or her, and they want to try something different and they want to now do crime analysis, yeah, I get that. But that's just not something like, well, you were a police officer, you should know how to do crime analysis. No, absolutely not. Just like a crime analyst shouldn't be handed a gun and a badge and say, you know what, we're a little short-staffed today, head on out there. So I feel strongly that those are two independent positions within a department. And I don't like that when a department says, well, you know what, Jimmy, the officer, you hurt your leg, so I'm going to have you do crime analysis now. That's sort of an affront to crime analysis, isn't it? It's like, you know what, I got a degree and training and went through all these courses for this and spent my young adult life learning this trade to do this. And because this guy has a sprained knee, he's going to come in here and do my job. That's insulting. So no, I never liked that. I think it should be the officer does their thing and the crime analyst does his or her thing and supports patrol, but neither of the two shall meet.
Just to finish up the section with the job seeker, is there anything that's different if the position is existing? You kind of touched on it, but I just wanted to finish up the segment there. If there's anything you wanted to add.
In terms of if the position's existing, then I guess this would apply maybe more to the interviewee or the applicant. There's so much data available to you. I mean, you're an analyst, go analyze it. So if you want to knock it out of the park and be their number one choice and the number two choice isn't even close, then go do your analytical kung fu. You know, there should be lots of data available to you. So study it up. So know their website inside and out. Know the chief's vision. The mission statement's going to be out there. Know how sort of their department numbers are. So what's their average response time for priority 0 calls? How many calls for service they have a year? What are their top crimes? What do the citizens want? Because again, the department's purpose is to serve its citizens. So what have the citizens said they wanted? Maybe you're able to get your hands on a citizen survey that was done or some feedback information that you've come across. You'll learn that, you know what, the number one concern of citizens is graffiti or it's speeding in school zones. If you can drop those sort of factoids in your interview, you're going to knock it out of the park because it's showing that department that you are attuned with what it is they're trying to do and what it is they do. The big thing is, as you now know all these facts, you're going to tailor your responses to their interview questions to include those sort of facts to demonstrate that you're going to be able to help them achieve their goals. So it's not enough just to throw out, well, your average response time is this, but instead you could tie that to a question they had to say, well, you know, based on your question, what I know is your average response time is 4.2 seconds or 4.2 minutes. That's pretty good at a response time.
Lightning quick.
Yeah, that's really good. So what I would suggest is, you know, X, Y, and Z in your response. That kind of stuff shows that you've done your homework, that you understand what that department is doing. You understand what the crime analysis unit does, because you should be able to find all that stuff out too. You've already, of course, connected with them on LinkedIn, the analyst that is. You know what they say they do. You might even have had the gumption to call them and ask them. So yeah, it's kind of cool to be able to apply to a department that already has an existing crime analysis unit, because you can find out an awful lot about what their expectations are going to be and offer that up in the interview.
Yeah, Sally Tarabah, I had her on the show, and she replaced me at Cincinnati Police Department. And she contacted, yes, well, she did and did it quite well. But anyway, she reached out to me and asked me several questions about the position and what to expect and any advice that I had for her. And I was happy to give it. And
that's why she's sitting in your old seat.
Yes. So that's a really good tip, and I think can be helpful, even if it was somebody that if the job has gone through several generations now of analysts, talking to somebody that might have been there years ago can also be helpful.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move on now where the position is in the hierarchy of an agency, department, or business. For the existing position, maybe this stays the same, but it should be at least visited that maybe where you have that analyst stationed isn't the best and can be improved on. Or maybe you talked about the difference between like patrol, strategic versus administration versus tactical. There might be some room there to change. In terms of maybe the new position, talk about maybe some things to be thinking about from the manager's point of view in selecting the location and maybe even the department where the position will physically be and report to.
This is such a big question, isn't it? Because you're asking it because I know how bad this can go if it's done wrong.
Yes, exactly.
It's a good question. So hiring managers, listen up. So whoever that analyst is going to report to, that will dictate who their primary customer is. So choose wisely. Also, who the analyst reports to, just because of the way the chain of command and the organizational structure is of a department, where you choose to place your analyst will send a message to the department, whether you like it or not, about who is the customer for that analyst typically, and also their status within the department. So if you hire an analyst and you put them smack dab in patrol, they're where patrol briefing is, patrol is constantly milling around, and patrol is almost always separate from admin and investigations, so on and so forth, at least in the hundreds of departments that I've seen. So you're sending a message by putting that analyst in patrol that that's who their customer is. It would be bizarre to put the analyst in patrol and then, sort of give marching orders to patrol and also the analyst that, you know what, we really just want you to focus on admin stuff and focus on the chief's goals and needs and the administrative needs of the department. Really don't spend time with patrol. Spend time with us. That would be odd. So where you choose to put that person, that analyst, is a message to the department of where their primary sort of purpose is. Now, we were very fortunate in Tempe, and I always like to go back and be like, well, Tempe did this. But in my personal experience, what was nice about having the analytical shop where it was, all the analysts and the interns, was that it wasn't anywhere. It was actually off the lobby. So it wasn't in patrol. It wasn't in investigations. It wasn't in admin. It was in no man's land. It was right off of the entrance to the police department. And we would lock our door because, we don't want the loonies coming into our office all the time. But it was awesome because it was also right in between, almost like mathematically in between investigations and patrol. So patrol had just as much hold on us as investigations did because we were right in the middle. So if you were in patrol, you would think that, oh, okay, well, yeah, we have access to crime analysis, but also investigations does because they're, equally a distance away. Administration, like in most departments that I've visited, is usually on a second or third or higher floor because, ivory tower, right? Mm-hmm. So that's okay because you'll always service administration. But the message of having the analyst unit on that sort of first floor in between investigations and patrol sent a clear message that investigations and patrol can equally use it and that it wasn't put in administration for that reason. Now, I understand that years after I had left, that they took an analyst and they put him up on third floor, and that analyst was still sort of doing or meant to do all types of crime analysis functions. But what they learned was the only people who really used that analyst were people on the third floor, because it was also close to IA, or IA, internal affairs, basically. And so people in patrol and investigations weren't really keen on walking up and passing IA all the time. So that analyst really did just a whole bunch of administration stuff. There's a perfect example of where you choose to put that analyst is going to sort of dictate what their customer is, and then thus what their sort of primary functions and purpose are.
Sure. And just to add that proximity does matter to your clients. When I was at Baltimore Police Department, we were transferred from research and development directly to the homicide unit.
Yeah.
And so that totally changed the types of questions, the types of tasks that we were getting. We were helping assist homicide partially up to that point. But once we were there in the homicides unit, that's pretty much all what we did. That was 100% of our purpose and goal. So, and then other aspects at Cincinnati, I was stationed with IT. So I got a lot of tasks that would probably be considered data management or just general city request for data. We did stuff where we were working on a RAND study and it was a lot of it was pretty complex because you had to fit a data definition, for instance. So it was specific extracts, but that got into more data management as opposed to what someone might say is law enforcement analysis.
Interesting.
From the job seeker perspective, I think you touched on it, but is there any advice that you would have for them in terms of you find out where they are in the hierarchy or where they're at physically? Do you have any additional advice for the job seeker?
I think I pretty much touched on it, but that should give them insight into what they're going to be doing and what their chain of command is going to be. And that kind of is, I guess my answer would be for both hiring managers and job seekers, in that when the choice is made to say, okay, this analyst is going to report to this individual, once again, that is a message to the department of what the status of that analyst is and who might be the primary recipient of the analytical product. So if you assign that analyst to a sergeant, well, that is going to be one patrol-driven analyst doing probably a lot of tactical, maybe some strategic, a little bit of intel sprinkled in for good measure, but probably no admin, unless now there becomes this power struggle where administration comes down and says, we need the analyst to do a beat reconfiguration study. And the sergeants now put him in a position to say, well, I've got them doing this, or okay, because chain of command, I have to have them do this. And it just gets weird. So no different than placing the analyst sort of in no man's land or a dead zone to help them sort of be able to service everybody. I would almost say they report to a position that is almost in a no man's land or dead zone. And what that is, you just got to find the right one in the department. But a patrol sergeant would not be it. A lieutenant, I wouldn't probably have anybody in a command position, a sergeant, a lieutenant, something like that, unless you go high enough up where they report to a commander or a captain, because at that level, they're responsible for the entire department, right? Or at least a large portion of it.
Yes,
so again, the message sent to the department is this analyst is directly reporting to the commander, and the commander's over all of patrol and investigations. There's your message. Or, this assistant chief is over all of patrol investigations. And so they're going to be doing these things. And it also sort of shows the status of that analyst too. If you have that analyst report to a sergeant, what you've told your entire department is, we see an analyst as equal to a patrol officer. If you have that analyst report to somebody like an assistant chief, then it's okay, well, they're like a management analyst, or there's some sort of almost like an elevated position, which they should be in a department. Because last thing you want is officers coming in and sort of dictating, or investigators dictating what the analyst does. In my mind, this is my own little personal opinion, I think the analyst is a step above an investigator or an officer in terms of their rank in the department. And I say that, and a little bit of proof to this, because I said in our previous podcast that we had, that when I went from being a crime analyst in my department, at least, to a patrol officer, I had to sign a form that says I was willing to take a voluntary demotion. And so, again, that gives you a sense of that analyst should have a little bit of an elevated position in a department, and that their salary is commensurate of that. You don't be paying them less than what a patrol officer makes. An analyst needs to make a good wage. And once again, where the department, where your investigators and your patrol sees what the analysts make, that's where they'll sense too what their position in the department is and what their status is.
So now let's talk about working with HR. From the manager's perspective, what advice would you have for working with HR, whether the position is a new position or an existing position?
I would go back to those previous answers, reference them as it relates to contacting neighboring agencies to see if you can get some assistance from an analyst or an analyst supervisor to sit on the board to be able to provide you tests that they might have used too in the hiring process. Because again, you're going to want to test the incoming analyst. Don't just take it what the application says, or I should say their application says about whether or not they can do certain statistical techniques and know certain softwares. You're going to want to test those things. And there's no weirdness about that. That's expected. So one of the nice things that the HR people can do is to, again, contact neighboring agencies and get all that legwork done for them so they don't have to do it, because they're not going to want to craft a test, and they're not going to want to try and come up with interview questions and the like. So the best thing they can do is, in fact, enlist the help of neighboring agencies.
Some departments are going to have policies from HR that are very strict, and other ones that aren't as going to be as strict. And so you might be in a position as a manager to where the HR department really is going to limit the process. I can think of some situations where HR would screen applications from the manager and only allow the manager to see the ones after they have deemed them qualified. So make some folks aware of some of the different issues that may come about in working with HR department in terms of trying to hire a position.
Yeah, I like that. And I would have said the exact same thing. Having experienced that, where they'll provide you hear there was 300 applications submitted, but yet they hand you 50 of them. And you're like, why am I only getting 50? What's up with the other ones? Mm-hmm. Like, well, they didn't meet MQ, the minimum qualification. So there's your note right there, or there's your marching order. Don't make your minimum qualifications such that you may eliminate somebody who would be a good candidate. So do you really need to require a master's degree? If you do, there'd be an awful lot of really strong crime analysts out there that wouldn't be able to apply for the job, who you would love to have working for your agency just because you made that MQ, that educational requirement, so stringent. Do you really need 5 years work experience? Not many analysts have that. So that's another one that the manager, the hiring manager, in coordination and working with HR, needs to make sure that HR knows that, look, there are going to be some minimum qualifications, but let's not shoot for the stars, knowing we might eliminate some really qualified or otherwise great candidates.
Just add that from my personal experience, civil service positions are a different animal as well. And I guess the advice I would have from a manager perspective is really understand what the process is for civil service. I was caught in a position years ago where I was going for a position, had met the hiring manager at a conference. We had built a good rapport. And just as he was putting everything together for the position, he was told that it had to be a civil service position. I had 10 years of experience at the time, so I didn't really think much of it. But then what happened was I went through the process, put in my application, and what the HR department did is they took everybody's application. Basically, instead of going through it and really giving everybody a good test score, they just basically gave you a pass or fail. So either you got a 0 on it or 100% on it. Then what happened was they selected the top 5 candidates from that evaluation, which, okay, well, with 10 years of experience as an analyst, I should be able to get into the top 5.
Right.
Well, what happened was with another policy is that military experience, you automatically got 5 points added to your score.
Yeah.
So there were 5 military applicants. So I actually, for as well qualified for that position as I was, and as much as the manager that I was talking to, and he and I had built rapport with, he couldn't even bring me in for an interview because I wasn't in the top 5 because of how the civil service position was structured.
Is an amazing segue into the second part that I was going to say is how you weight the various sections of the interview process. So like you said, they're weighting military service with an extra 5 points. So I don't know what the overall scale was, but likewise, if you're going to have them take a test, if you're going to have them perform software techniques, if you're going to have them do an oral board, if you're going to have them submit a writing sample as well as product examples, these all are obviously components of the overall application. And I would make it such that a lot of folks are able to get to the oral boards. Because so much can come out in the oral boards that you might have eliminated candidates because they might not have done the best thing with, let's say, their products, or maybe they failed one aspect of the statistical test and thus they immediately disqualified themselves. I would rather look at it to say, well, were they really strong in other areas? So the weighting comes into play is pretty important at that point.
Yeah, so definitely for managers, know the rules and regulations of the hiring. That's pretty much what we come out of it.
Because what I found an awful lot with working with agencies hiring is they would tell me, well, we can't do a test. It doesn't meet these standards, or our city won't allow us to test because of biases and so on and so forth. And it got so watered down that it was like, well, you just might as well interview everybody, because if you're not going to be able to, use these other tools to distinguish your applicants, you're really going to have to bring them all in at this point to have them articulate why they are right for the position. So, sometimes HR can truly get in the way. For example, HR made us, when we were doing a hiring test, and it was using software, and our agency was using MapInfo only at the time. To make it fair, they wanted us to write a component of the test to also be able to do it in ArcGIS or ArcView at the time. Well, that's great, but guess what? When they get hired, if they only knew ArcView and did well on ArcView, goody good, for them. Now you need to learn MapInfo. This is what we use here. So HR can sometimes also get in the way because they have to adhere to certain standards and rules and laws and regulations as it relates to hiring. And you may have to broaden the test to accommodate everybody in that regard, but you're going to have to do it. It's just the way of the world. They'll also do that with questions. So you need to make sure as you're asking these candidates questions, you're going to want HR to review these questions. Put the onus on them to have that legal responsibility, because the last thing you want to be doing is asking a question unwittingly knowing that it's a biased question or that you're not allowed to ask that from an HR perspective. Cities are pretty stringent when it comes to those sorts of things. So always get your HR to review these questions.
Switch over to the job seeker, because I think the job seeker in terms of HR, this might be the very first person or department that is open to the public where you can call them up and start asking questions as a job seeker. Whereas you might have difficulty getting through to either the department or the actual manager of the position. But HR should be open to the public, and you should be able to contact them and ask questions about the position. So what advice do you have for the job seeker? What do you suggest they find out from the HR department?
Well, first, I love that you said that, because you're absolutely right. And not a lot of people realize that they could contact HR. I mean, maybe they'll try and contact the crime analysis unit or somebody within the department who can give them some insight so that they perform well in the interview. But you're right. You can not only call HR, but if it's local to you, walk on in there and sit down and have a conversation with somebody. Maybe they're going to be open enough to tell you what the weights are, so you can get the weighting of the test, that is. So they could let you know, well, we really look favorably upon the performance in the software portion of the test, or the interview is very highly weighted. Or you could even get HR to tell you, what I would ask is, well, who are going to be the people interviewing me? What's the process there? Can I get their names? Because it's a government entity, chances are they're going to be obliged to give you that. I would have a full-blown, not to be stalkerish about this, but I would know everything about everybody on that panel before I went into that interview process, if I had that ability to do so. Because you're going to want to appeal to them, right? They're the ones deciding whether or not you're going to be the candidate that gets the job. Why would you not want to relate to them? And so you'll want to know all that you can about their positions and what they've done in the department. So that's a really good point, Jason. Yeah, contact HR and find out as much about that position as you can. If they have intentions, because HR will know this, if this is the only position that's currently available, or are they planning for future positions too? You might learn through HR that they're hiring an analyst right now this year, but they're actually going through the budgetary process for hiring another 2 or 3 down the road. And it may be that the one down the road is a tactical crime analysis, and that's really your passion. Maybe you want to wait and apply for that one. So yeah, there's a lot you can learn from HR.
Yes. And I think even if it's a private company, If they're big enough to have HR, they're going to be able to provide you with some of the same information that you just touched on. They're probably not going to tell you that they're hiring in the future next year, just because businesses kind of like to keep a lot close to the chest, so to speak, in terms of their future plans. But you can still find good information from HR, an HR department from a private company.
Yeah.
The last segment for this section I want to touch on briefly is the documentation from the manager. And I think this is something that often gets overlooked, is that whether it's a new position or you're making changes to an existing position, good documentation is crucial. Future versions of yourself will need that and really appreciate any documentation that you have. Do you have any, additional thoughts on things that maybe you like to see in documentation, or any advice in terms of when it comes to documentation of a position?
I'll go back to what I said earlier. Agencies don't really do this, but it would be nice if, in addition to saying, well, here are the standards that we expect our analysts to adhere to and perform, maybe they just come right from CLIA, the standards there. That's what I've found in my travels. Most departments do. They just rip it right out of the CLIA standards, and it's like, you will do these things and you'll do these things, because guess what? When you do these things, we can check these boxes that allows us to at least meet these standards for the CLIA test or the CLIA accreditation process. So I would definitely do that. I would go back to the KPI comment that I made earlier. So you're hiring this new individual, maybe you're the manager that's over this, and you're trying to document how this job is going to go down, what your expectations are. But the analyst needs to know, and it would be nice if they know right from day one, or even during the application process, how are they going to be measured? Because the analyst is going to want to succeed and perform well, and the manager is going to want them to succeed and perform well. So why shouldn't the metrics by which they're going to be measured for success be made visible and aware to everybody right up front? So even during the application process. So if I know that in a year I'm going to be up for review, what are those measures that I'm going to be reviewed against? And those key performance indicators, what are my metrics? And so if I know that as an employee, I can know that, okay, month one, let's do a little self-check. How am I doing? Am I meeting my metrics? Am I performing to expectations? So on and so forth. So that when either the 3-month or the 6-month or the 1-year review comes down, I know that I'm on target for 5 stars or a full review, or my complete raise that's possible coming to me. And so from a documentation standpoint, from the manager, share that with that employee. Make them aware of what those key performance indicators are, because you want them to succeed. The sort of the opposite of that is also your defense. So if you are the manager and you've shared and been very forthright with what those performance metrics are and those key performance indicators that employee has to meet, and they're not meeting them, and you were crystal clear from the get-go, you have better documentation. Get back to the sort of the section title. You have better documentation for the unfortunate scenario, which is now you've got to terminate them. There's nothing worse as a manager to have nothing but the best intentions when you hire somebody, think you've set out sort of an understanding of what the job's going to do. They're not really performing it. You really haven't written down or presented in a very sort of, methodological way what they need to do, and they're not performing, and now you need to fire them. And now you need to go back and justify to HR that you've done your due diligence in documenting what needs to be done to terminate. If you haven't had all that, if you haven't had clear measurable goals and objectives, you're going to have a tough time in that battle.
No, that's good. And some of those things we're going to talk a little bit more detail in future episodes here, but that's still good advice. And so the next part is, as a manager, you create the job announcement, the job announcement gets made. And what I want to finish this episode with, though, is the advice and lessons learned that you might have for the job seeker. The job announcement's out there. Now you got to go through, and maybe you're deciding, is it time to switch? If do I qualify? So I want to end this episode specifically talking to the job seeker and your advice. Some of these job announcements, I mean, for the pay range that they're asking for, there's nobody in the country that's going to fit that. And it seems like a lot of these job announcements, they have a lot of different qualifications, and some job seekers may be confused on whether they qualify. What advice would you have as a job seeker reading the job announcement and trying to decide whether he or she qualifies?
If you're applying for a doctor's position and you don't have a medical degree, you probably aren't even going to stand a chance being like, well, I watch a lot of YouTubes and I think I got a sense of things. Or, I was a big fan of Quincy back in the day, so I think I can do it.
Oh, you're showing
That's not
your
going to
age.
cut it, obviously. But fortunately for us, the profession of crime analysis isn't so, structured. And so I would go for a lot of positions that I was not qualified for. For example, if they were to ask me, or if the minimum qualifications on the job description were 2 to 3 years of experience as working as an analyst, but I only had a year and a half as an intern in a crime analysis unit, I would absolutely apply for that. Because who knows, getting back to what we talked about earlier with the weighting of sections, they may not have that be an automatic disqualifier. It may be one of these things where not necessarily preferred versus automatic disqualification, but they may have it to where they're weighting it. And they'll look at the number of years you had, just like you had said, whether or not they had military service, it becomes a weight. So they'll look at me and maybe I only have a year and a half. However, I knock out of the park all the other aspects that they're asking for. So I'm always of the mind to apply for bigger positions that I think they might think I'm a candidate for. Why not? What's the worst that can happen? You apply for a manager supervisor position that you don't have the experience for, but yet you get through a little bit of the process and you learn from it. You learn about the hiring process. You learn about the oral boards or the interview process. You get that opportunity to practice a little bit further. You hone your resume and your products, and you start seeing more of what they're looking for. Maybe you're able to get some feedback. So although they didn't hire you, maybe they just outright disqualified you, you might be able to call HR or the hiring manager and say, you know what could I have done differently? What were you looking for? And you begin to gain insights. So I wouldn't read those job descriptions as gospel. I would read them as, okay, here's a general guide to what our ideal candidate would possess. But that's not to say that you might be able to knock it out of the park in other areas. And just because you don't have a master's degree or you only have a bachelor's degree, you might not still be considered. You might.
In terms of resources, there's the standard ones. Obviously, the internet, LinkedIn, some of the more well-known aspects to where job seekers might identify potential jobs. Do you have some maybe under the radar sources that they could look in?
I've been out of the biz for a while, so I don't know if my Rolodex is as strong anymore. But of course, you've got like the IACA, the listservs, any organizations that cater to crime analysts. You best belong to your local one. So if I'm an analyst or I'm a wannabe analyst, I'll say, maybe I'm going through school and I'm graduating this December. Well, I'm going to want to see if I can already get into the local associations. Maybe they let me in as a volunteer or an intern or somebody who's seeking a job there. At a minimum, engage with that local association so that you begin to establish yourself. Because when your name might come across the desk, one of those analysts that might be a part of that association may be on the oral board or the hiring process and be like, oh yeah, this guy, he's really a go-getter. He's coming to the meetings, or he's reading and contributing to our blogs, different things like that, or comments on my LinkedIn posts. So the associations would be a really good, rich source of potential jobs and getting yourself sort of out there. Then just, sort of looking out on the different government websites. So if you're not going to look at every single 18,000 of the agencies' websites, so you're going to want to pick your top, I would say, 50 agencies that you want to go work for. You need to be following them and getting all their announcements as well as job announcements, and they can put you on a list. So they might not be hiring an analyst right now, but the moment that they post that job, you're going to get that notification so that you're not having to constantly go back to that. I would probably do that as well. And then, the internships, that's the best way to get get yourself prepared for a job is you're doing the internship, you're therefore in the department, and you could advocate for yourself to get the position that might be coming open. There's a lot of ways to do that. LinkedIn, you mentioned that. I don't know that the jobs get posted a lot on LinkedIn. I've seen a few of them, and again, that might just be that I'm so out of the business that I'm not looking for a crime analyst job. So they may be out there, but I'm just not seeing them. But I'll repeat something I said in a previous podcast we had, where I talked about being an intern and taking pride in that, enlisting that. So you're a job seeker, you're out there, you're trying to find a position, and you might not already be a crime analyst, or you have been a crime analyst, but you're not right now and you're trying to get a new job, or you want to get into the profession of crime analysis. And so either you're a student, you're recently graduated, you may be an intern, whatever it is, that needs to be foremost on LinkedIn. You need to be posting on there what your purpose for being on LinkedIn is. I wish to get a job as a crime analyst in a police agency, because I said in the previous podcast that as a person who hired crime analysts, now I was a private company hiring analysts to go work for the Defense Department and then also work in local police departments and sheriff's departments. But I was as a hiring manager, querying through LinkedIn, looking for crime analyst interns, because these were people who were getting trained up by an agency that I knew were probably going to be looking for a job soon. As a hiring manager, I would reach out to them and say, hey, look, what are you looking to do? You looking to relocate? Tell me a little bit about your skill set. And that was almost like a pre-interview for that individual. So again, that was me being a hiring manager, just one of 1,000 out there who is actively looking at LinkedIn, trying to find applicants, Orioles job seekers, to hire.
To add to your advice on associations, you mentioned IACA, there's IALEA, there's several different ones out there to reach out to. And for college graduates or people that are in college, you qualify to be members to these organizations. And so not only will they give you access to people in the field, they also all offer hands-on coursework, webinars, stuff that you can do online. I think for IACA's webinars, I think are like $10 for like an hour-long webinar on a variety of different topics. And most of them are very hands-on information that you can learn. So that's definitely something to seek out. And you had mentioned relocating, and that's something that kind of sticks with people. Most people obviously want to stay close to home, but their particular area around their home might not be hiring analysts right now. So I guess, what advice do you have for those that are trying to decide whether they should relocate?
Well, it's a tough market right now. And so I would suggest if they want to be an analyst and there's a position open and there's not one sort of on the horizon locally, go take the position that is offered you. Just get your foot in the door and get that experience. You can always advance through that department or use that to leverage that position and that skill set that you've obtained to go to another department. I would do that. I know it's hard once people start having a family and you start settling down and kids are in school, but a lot of us have been there, and it sometimes has worked out to be the best move that they'd ever done. So I know when I left Tempe to go work at the University of Denver, it was one of the best moves I had ever made, personally, professionally, even sort of just climate change was even better going from Arizona at 120 degrees to beautiful Colorado. I mean, that really gave me just that environment now was amazing. So yeah, you just have to relocate. It is what it is. The chances of you getting a job or being able to land that job right there in your hometown are pretty remote.
I would say we just had on the show Danielle Giraud, and she took a job clear across the country, stayed there a year, decided that she was really missing her home, and then found a job that was, instead of 10 states away, was 3 states away. And I would just, for the job seekers out there, if you take a job and then you find something that's just better for you, whether it's in terms of your goals or whether you want to be closer to home, granted, you never go out thinking that the job that you're going to take is going to be short term, but no one's going to be super angry with you, or at least they shouldn't be, that you found something that's better for you, even if it's shortly after starting another position.
Not in the least, not in crime analysis, especially. So that's one of those things that maybe in the business world, if we see that people, if I'm hiring a developer and I see the developer is every 7 months seems to be changing positions, that absolutely factors into my decision making. But from an analyst perspective, no, if they articulate, when you're asked, well, why did you leave your previous position? Well, I want to go to this department because X, Y, and Z, it's closer to home, whatever those factors are good. And I would put a finer point to this to say, go find the job that you want, or apply to and go after with all your might the agency that you want to work for. I wanted to work for Tempe more than any agency. It just had a buzz about it. It's hard to describe. I wanted to work there so bad. And there were other positions opened in other jurisdictions that were not far drives. I could have easily have done them, but I didn't want to work there. I wanted to work for Tempe. So much so that even after not getting the job, having been an intern in the crime analysis unit, and being beaten out by my nemesis, Paul Bentley, who I think now is the crime analyst supervisor there, was at Scottsdale. But, I stuck with it. I'm like, all right, I want to keep doing an internship. I milked that internship for 12 credit hours through ASU, which I don't know anybody who can get 12 credit hours out of an internship. If you do, hats off. And basically what I was trying to do is just not be kicked out of that agency, because I knew that was my best position to be in, to get a position there or a job there. And eventually they worked hard to find a second crime analyst position, budget for it, and I got that position. So go find the department you absolutely want to work for. If it's LAPD, if it's Orange County Sheriff, if it's you want to be an intel analyst at NYPD, go freaking do it. Do everything you can to get into that agency. And it's not just, I'm going to passively wait for them to open a job and then I'll apply like the 500 other people that are going to apply to that dream job. You're already laying the groundwork weeks, months, even years in advance for wanting to work for that agency. So when that application gets opened up, they are well aware of you wanting to work there already. That's what I would strongly suggest people do. So where you want to be. When you graduate college, you're like, I want to move to Chicago. I love Chicago. It's the town for me. I don't personally, but somebody might say, I want to work there. It's, great vibe. I love the environment. I love the architecture. Then go work there. Do everything you can to get a job there. I would say, be careful about just sort of taking the first thing that comes your way and just getting, okay, well, there's a crime analyst job here, so I'll take that. That might give you some experience. But then again, as I've said in sort of business lectures, if you have a goal in life and it's plan A and you want to do plan A more than anything else, every moment that you spend thinking about plan B or the fallback plan is going to take away from your efforts toward achieving plan A. So I would say focus on plan A. Go for it and get it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and it's pretty much what you said anyway, it's know your goals, identify them, know them, and that'll help guide you. Well, very good, Sean. I think this is a good spot to end the search for the audience. Managers, job seekers, I hope you got something out of this and you're starting the process of either hiring or you're starting the process in terms of seeking a new job. Step 2 in our guide is the application. We hope you join us next time in talking about the application. This has been Analyst Talk with Jason Elder, the special edition limited series, Sean Bair's Guide to Hiring a Law Enforcement Analyst. Thank you for joining me. Thank you, Sean. Any last words on this episode?
Good luck in your job search.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to The Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another